Yeah. All right. Hey, Core.
Hey, Hannah.
How you doing?
I'm doing really good today.
Great. Are you feeling courageous?
I am feeling particularly courageous, mostly because I'm with you and also because it's my birth week. I'm celebrating my birthday in a few days, so I'm feeling a lot of energy from the
Oh,
universe.
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait to like bring in your birth week. Are you like a big birthday celebration? Like, is it your birth month or like your birth week? Like, do you really? I could see you going all out. I think I remember this.
If any of my good friends are listening, they would be laughing right now and rolling their eyes because, yes, I love to celebrate all month long. And I love any excuse to bring my friends together. Connecting my favorites is like the best thing on the planet, but I also love any excuse to reflect at like a symbolic
Mm,
moment in time. So my, anniversary of going around the sun is usually when I'm
yeah.
goal setting and checking in on my goals and feeling extra grateful, things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think you and I are very similar in that way of like, I've got my yearly reflections journal, and I was just love goal setting. Like my favorite thing to do. It's probably why we're such good friends. Just like little nerds over here. Well, I wanted to start like when with us talking about courage, and I wanted to start talking about Brene Brown and Taylor Swift because I think that Brene Brown is the Taylor Swift of self-help. Even though she's not technically self-help, she's a researcher, she's like a very esteemed and educated woman. But I'm thinking, why do people gravitate so intensely to both Brene Brown and Taylor Swift? And part of it is, I think, their courage and their vulnerability. Like both of them show up as they are
Yes.
and aren't really afraid to show the messy parts. And I think that there's such an attraction to that. What do you think?
Ah, that's a really good summary. I think the word that stood out for me is authenticity. For instance, Brene is the captain and author of What is Vulnerability, but she also was vulnerable enough to role model it when she shared her very first TED Talk and brought vulnerability awareness to the world.
Yeah.
Taylor, in the same way as us during birthday month, is not afraid to be completely like over the top herself, exuberant and extravagant about what she loves. But it's anchored in what she loves, which is songwriting and delivering the music to her fans. So I feel like you can't even be courageous without starting by rooting in what's authentic to you, which takes so many
Yeah.
other precursors like self-awareness and research.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So I did want to start with like looking at, so this is Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, which I absolutely love. It goes through 87, I think it's 87 feelings and emotions and states of being, and it gives the definitions and goes into deep dive on each one. So I was looking up vulnerability and courage, and it just said there's no courage without vulnerability. Courage requires the willingness to lean into uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And I was like, ooh, emotional exposure. So why don't we begin and just talk about, our own personal definitions of courage and when we first witnessed courage.
Mhm. Okay, great place to start. I've been thinking about this a lot, as you know, in preparation for this courageous convo. And I think that courage is something that is very easy to have unknowingly. And you can kind of be
Mm,
unconsciously courageous or competent at being brave. So when I thought about what it entails and what it requires, I think courage is the kind of act and willingness of tuning into what you want and believing in your ability and like deservedness to have what you want so
mm,
that you can. I mean, I guess the third pillar perhaps of courage then is the will and fortitude to go for that. So maybe it's the thing that scares you, or maybe it's the thing that you want to achieve or deliver to the world. Whatever that is, I think starts with the awareness, willingness, and action to chase it.
mm. Yeah, it's interesting thinking about courage and then thinking about that the first step is actually knowing what you want and having that clarity. I haven't necessarily thought of courage in that way, but if you don't have that self-awareness, then you can't necessarily act on it. And what I see is a lot of people actually burying what they want. Like I see this in my coaching practice. I'm thinking of one of my clients in particular, and it was like when we first started working together, they were like, I don't even really know what I do want. I know what my dad wants me to do, but I don't. Or when I kept asking him what he wanted, he would say like, "Oh, well, my father wants, my father thinks that I should." And I'm like, "No, no, no, no. We're not talking about your dad. We're talking about you.
Right.
Like, what do you want?" And it like
Mhm.
I had to keep coming back to it over and over because I think there is a lot of societal conditioning, and that it comes with like patriarchal conditioning, capitalism, and all that. So we kind of can't remove the system from our needs and desires because they are so embedded into each other. But it is an interesting concept of, in order to be courageous, the first step is you have to know you.
Mm. That is something, though, that didn't come to me until I really started examining it and looking back at moments where I saw what I thought was courage, but also moments I felt like I was brave or, had to muster up some courage myself. And so I'll credit one of my dear friends who is a writer and shared with me this kind of example that helped me break through. She said, courage isn't just about doing things that scare you. For instance, you might have a fear of heights, Hannah, and I say, "Oh, well, have courage and go skydiving with me." Jenna, her name's Jenna Schmidt, said, "Why would I jump out of a plane when I have really no desire to do that? And
Mm,
it's a safety hazard." She said, "What I think courage is about is really like listening and being willing to expose yourself to like the true desires laying under that systemic what you want assumption."
yeah.
And I agree. It's so societal and so embedded. Sometimes we can't even distinguish which one it is. But then once you are aware and you can root down in maybe just something that you desire, or maybe your why, like your really deep purpose for the world and for others, then you kind of realize why you need to take bold steps or why you need to face the thing you're afraid of. I realize that anchoring in something that is important to me is really the only thing that's ever helped me to do something brave.
Mm. Well, I was gonna wait till the end to like tee this up, but this is actually like such a good segue into, I am launching in about a month time. It's called the Purpose Course. And it's really for high performers who feel stagnant in their career. And it's to help them find their why. We really anchor on purpose. But then throughout the course, there's 3 days called Courage Days, because you know me, I'm all about action. And I'm like, I don't just want to like sit here and talk about what your purpose is. I want you to fucking do something about it. Like I want you to
Yes.
really take action with it. So the 3 days peppered throughout the course are really so people can start doing things that are actually living out your courage. So, or living out your purpose. So, I mean, for example, for me, it's like, a lot of I feel like one of my purpose statement is like telling the truth. And that comes in all different forms. I think that comes in my coaching practice, what I deliver. That also comes in my fiction writing. So for me, I have to make a practice each week of writing fiction, writing my stories, finishing my novel, sending out short stories. But then also, how do I show up and tell the truth, even in my social media content for my business? It's like, am I going to sit here and try to please everyone? Or, going back to Atlas of the Heart, am I going to be a little bit emotionally vulnerable and like risk emotional exposure because I know that this is the truth and this is my truth and this is what I want my business to stand for. So I have to take action in that.
That's such a great example, Hannah, that shows anyone listening. You do have to be aware, though, of what is your purpose on this earth or what gives you fire and the light to get out of bed in the morning. If I think about your example in the inverse, let's say you weren't really aware of how important integrity and truth are to you. You probably would have a lot harder time getting motivated to do the social media because some people who want to have their own business
Mm.
don't love doing the social part. So I am obsessed with that example. And I think there are definitely going to be what I've also recognized things that not only we're afraid of, but things that just we don't want to do because they scare us or they make us uncomfortable or just simply because we're not good at them. So they require a lot of intentionality and effort, those are the things that also require courage to learn. You have to be willing to risk the exposure and failure and insecurity of maybe not doing it well or having no one look at your posts or making a trade-off because setting up social media posts like takes away an hour that you could be spending with your partner or outside with Apollo. And I find that that's the other thing that takes courage, is being willing to set aside other things in pursuit of what you really want to do or have.
1,000,000%. And I think of that a lot with my fiction writing. It's like, obviously my business, funds my life. So I don't really have, like, I have a choice. I could go work at corporate. I could do other things, but not have my own business. But I think about, writing fiction, and I've been working on my first novel for probably 3 years now, writing short stories. I write for 4 to 5 hours a week. And I mean, that's like a work day, half a work day. And how much time that takes away from other things that are revenue producing activities. But I know that I just know something deep inside me is like, you're meant to do this. You're meant to be a creator. You're meant to be a writer. So you have to move forward with it. And then getting my master's and taking courses, and how much time and energy and investment that I've spent writing for potentially no payoff. Let's be like, the publishing industry, it's not really a lucrative industry, but I think that that's really aligned with me. And so I want to know, for you,
Yeah.
like, where in your life have you had to have the most courage, or maybe even right now, where do you feel like you are anchoring onto courage to then live into your purpose?
Oh, wow. I have so many examples coming to mind as you were talking, but they weren't about me. So I'm now going to kind of pivot and answer that. As you know, Hannah, I told you right before we jumped on, is that I was actually undergoing a bit of a courage challenge myself. So in preparation for this conversation, last week, exactly a week ago, I said, I'm going to do something brave every day. Like, that was just very simply put. Like, I wanted to see if I could test how many times I could really bring courage to every task, every interaction. And one of the things that I just touched on that I realized for me personally is saying no to something often for me requires just as much courage as doing something hard, because I struggle with what is historically dubbed as the disease to please. I don't want to let people down around me. And I'm also a token extrovert. I love like social connection. So I tend to try and maximize as many events as possible. So I recently had an invite or an opportunity to spend some family time, and I said no, because I felt really strongly that I needed to rest and recover for some of the other events I had coming up. Long story short, that felt really difficult. I felt terrible for some reason. It was a small moment, small event that became the trade-off, but it was vulnerable for me. And I decided to not only choose courage and say no, but I actually was really honest and gave more context than necessary. And I said, I hate to say no because I would love to see you. And I'm trying to do better at listening to my body and being authentic to it. So I'm going to pass on tonight. Everyone involved was so supportive. And I realized that muscle you're flexing and practicing will grow stronger. Like, it will get easier for me the more honest and in touch I am. So when it comes to energy management, that's one way I'm trying to illustrate courage. The other example that came to mind is much further up the spectrum of, boldness and public risk of exposure. But I also have a little idea brewing for a type of content I want to bring to the world. So thank you, Hannah, for inviting me to this, podcast-ish, because I have been wanting to take the leap for a while and potentially soft launch a podcast, whether that will be through Instagram or LinkedIn Live. I'm not sure yet. But instead of continuing to think about it and brainstorm the perfect launch plan, I decided that I was going to ask for help, which takes courage, and schedule time by the end of this month. Basically, by the end of February, my commitment to all of you is that I'm going to record my first episode or interview of the podcast. And just taking the leap to put that in the calendar has been a huge impetus for me, huge momentum giver. And it was scary to almost admit or acknowledge, but by having like a little dose of courage to say it has given me so much more confidence. And by the way, encouragement from my network and the women who I reached out to ask if they wanted to be a guest, that I have decided encouragement is probably called that for a reason. Our networks can give us encouragement. And I can't take full credit. By the way, I also saw that on an Instagram reel that my old roommate, Brittany, sent to me today. So if any of you are looking for more courage, it's okay to look outside of yourself for encouragement. Who knew, right?
Oh, I love that.
Probably
I
a
love the
reason. Probably a
encouragement.
reason.
Yeah. That's so good. Well, it's interesting with what, the first part that you spoke about of like actually taking the courage to listen to yourself, to listen to your body and put a boundary in. And something that I talk about with my clients quite frequently is when you start putting in boundaries, there is something that I call afterburn. And it's almost like the guilt. Yeah, it's like the guilt or shame. It could be shame that you feel of saying no, feeling like you're selfish, feeling like who am I to put that boundary in. And what I've seen again and again in my own life, as well as in my coaching practice, is the more you put in boundaries and the more you practice these things, that then the afterburn starts to subside and then you build that muscle. So I love that. I'm encouraging you. I'm cheering you
Thank you.
on to like continue doing that. And I'm so excited for Take the Leap as well. I think that's great. And I'll be there, of course. Yeah. And that's
Yes,
just,
you will.
yeah. 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 So, I mean, I think in my life, like when I've had the most courage, I think of two pretty distinct um, moments. One was admitting that I had a problem with alcohol and admitting that I was pretty dysfunctional in that area, both and going to a 12-step meeting and saying like, I'm an alcoholic, like a recovering alcoholic. I mean, at that point I was not recovering. I was just scared shitless because I didn't know I didn't know what a life would look like without alcohol and without partying. And I was such a party girl. And I felt like a lot of my identity was on that. And actually saying that, no, I have a problem. And no, it wasn't, I mean, I definitely did have a problem, but I also just knew that there was a life out there that I wanted to live, but I couldn't do that if I was still drinking. But I had no idea what that life was. And I just thought that there's something greater here for me, but I can't really have both. And I probably knew that years ago because I have a lot of alcoholism and drug addiction. It's like very rampant in my family. I've seen a lot of family members struggle with that, suffer with that, die from that. So I just kind of realized this is my genetic predisposition. And this likely isn't going to end well for me if I don't stop. So, I mean, getting sober at 27, so yeah, nearly 7 years ago was like, it was really hard because also everyone around me was still, I'm an expat. I live in Australia. Everyone around me was still drinking and partying and having a really great time. And I was like, I got sober and I was like, well, now I have no friends. Like, I don't know what to do. Who am I going to hang out with? And so I think for me, like that was probably one of the most courageous defining moments in my life, like saying I have a problem. And like you said, like asking for help and realizing how to do that. And then another one was the decision to leave LinkedIn after over 7 years and go back to school for creative writing and start my own coaching business. And I think that in starting my own business, like the emotional exposure that I felt just with, I don't necessarily really feel it anymore. It's been going for quite a while and I'm kind of used to it. But initially posting on social media, 5 times a week, like putting stories, telling people, like it's very different. I've been in sales my entire career. Having your own B2C coaching business is very different from selling B2B software. It's just like, it's a completely different sales process. It's a completely different marketing process. And a vulnerability that I felt, Christopher, the social habits are tough to adjust to when you choose sobriety. Yeah, Christopher, thank you for that. And yeah, it's a really, there's a comment here for anyone watching the replay, but yeah, social habits are really hard to adjust to when you choose sobriety. And I really had to like create a whole new social life. But yeah, the emotional exposure I think I did feel when starting my own business was so real. And I want to, in a little bit, get to actual tactical things that people can do in order to cultivate more courage. But having that, yeah, that emotional exposure, I was just like, oh my God, what are people going to think about this? And I think that's a really big fear as well for anyone that's curious about starting their own business. I know, Cory, we've had conversations about this, but for anyone that's curious about starting their own business, a really big fear is like, what are my colleagues going to think? And what are my friends going to think if I start showing up differently? And I'm here to tell you, like, yeah, people will talk, people will care, but also no one cares as much as you think they do. Like, you might be like a bit of conversation for like a few minutes, but ultimately, what are you going to do? Be miserable? Not necessarily that everyone's miserable in their corporate career. I know that's definitely not true. I was very happy in my corporate career for many years, but it's like, are you going to be courageous enough to choose the life that you want to live and then risk that emotional exposure?
What I thought you were going to say, Hannah, the only thing I'll add is, what do you care about more? What people are saying or how you feel about your own life? Because you're right, there will
Yeah.
always be a risk. Almost any path that you choose, there will be someone who has an opinion, whether that's critical or judgmental. So I am so proud and grateful actually to hear you share the two examples, because I'm lucky enough to have gotten to witness them when I lived in Sydney. And now thinking about all the fears and the voices in your head that tell you like, well, what will people say? Or what are people saying? Have been so drowned out by the joy and the gratitude you're getting from your clients and the fulfillment that you're getting from that new voice, if I may be so bold to say.
Yeah, yeah.
Courage to
And I
anyone.
think, yeah, totally. And I think, I mean, when I got sober, it was, I really felt like I wasn't on death's door or anything, but I really felt like this is life or death. So someone asked me at LinkedIn, like, oh, what are you going to do with your clients if you're not drinking? Because I did a lot of client lunches. And I was just like, I don't give a fuck. Like, this is so much bigger than like my client lunches. Like, who cares? And I think that, you know, like the decision to get sober was such a huge decision in my life, but it was such a pivotal one. And you know, I do think a big part of who I am today and my integrity and how I show up in the world. But then starting my own business, it felt like getting sober, it really felt like there was no other option. And starting my own business, it also kind of felt like there was no other option. But there is an option. I could go back to corporate. Like there is, you know, I have a lot of I have very marketable skills. So it was kind of realizing that, well, there is another option here, but what life do I want to live? And this is like, I have to be brave and continue with this, even when it's hard, even when financially it was really scary at first, in the first couple of months financially. I'm like, even, you know, that emotional exposure. So yeah, I'm just
Mm,
really hot. Like I'm actually living the life that I want to live, but I had to have courage for both of those things.
yeah. I also definitely feel I relate with you, and I feel that that courage to almost dismiss the risks, like the way that you asked about, for instance, someone's pushback on, well, what are you going to do with your clients? Or what are you going to do on Friday nights with your friends? I think there are two paths, and it's a good segue to our aim at really getting tactical, Hannah. Your first path could be like, ooh, well, that is scary to me. Like that's maybe a risk I'm not willing to brave yet. The other option is to think tactically about, okay, how can I counteract that risk with strength or with my values? So,
Mm.
like a really small example that came to mind. And I'm also reading a book that you recommended me, Hannah, which is Quit Like a Woman, because I have also had sober curiosity over the recent years. She talks about deciding what you're going to do instead to build the path, or at least the visible way forward, when you're worried about the trade-offs that you're making. So if you're worried about what you're going to do with your clients, maybe you decided to really lean in on having meetings with clients in the LinkedIn office because it's
Mm.
badass. That's a very small example that you've never shared with me. You did. But a different example of where I think I have not struggled, but felt the same fears, like, well, what will my family think, as an example? Or what will my friends think? So when I was faced with kind of the biggest opportunity to have courage was similarly when I was about 6 years into my career at this big tech company that everyone liked, LinkedIn. I was ready and interested in moving overseas too. And I had to answer the question of like, what will my family think now? Or how will I stay this woman that everyone knows me as, which is like a family person and the big sister of three. And so I decided that I was going to build new rituals to stay in touch with my family because I wasn't going to be able to see them as frequently. And, I became the moderator of the group chat and the group FaceTime. Thank goodness for technology and Apple. I also, I chose the alternative tactics that would help me maybe cushion the blow or the loss that I was going to give up or sacrifice. And I think every brave move, every, road less traveled means that you're making trade-offs with the other path that would have been easier or that you're on today. And it's okay to acknowledge it,
Yeah, completely. And it's like, what would you rather? Would you rather live a life or act in a life that that's something better out there? Not necessarily better, because you don't ever really know, but at least that that you tried and you
Correct.
showed up. Yeah. And I think that a point that you bring up with identity shift, like that is a big thing, especially if you're like, okay, well, I'm always been such a family person. That's one of my main values, but how can I move away? And, for me, it was like, it's very different, but I've always been such a party girl. How can I not be a party girl anymore? Like, what are people gonna think of me? But when I was leaving
It's real.
LinkedIn, when I was leaving LinkedIn, my dad was like, "What about all the Microsoft stock? Like, what are you gonna do?" And I was like, "Dad, what about my stock? Like,
What about
like, I'm the money maker here."
That's a great example.
Yeah, and it was, and I mean, similarly, I love and my father and I. My father's like such a funny character, but similarly, when I got sober, he was like, "What? Like, what are you talking about? Like, you don't want to lose your personality. You're so fun." And it was just realizing that, and a lot of people said similar things when I got sober, but it was like, "Oh, I don't, I have to take what you say and acknowledge it, but I also have to know what's best for me." And I think that where I see people not necessarily living, or when I see clients not necessarily living into their most courageous parts, it's when they are actually taking the input of others and really putting that on a pedestal and making that more of their higher power than their own opinions and their own wants and desires for themselves. So that's kind of, something to watch out for. It's like shiny object syndrome. Like, how much am I influenced by what others think I should be doing, or
Yeah.
What my mom says about starting my own business versus like getting my salary. Or even, I have a client who's looking at switching industries, switching careers, and she, works in a very lucrative industry right now, and she might have to take a step down. And it's like, well, there's a lot of fear there. What will people think? What will her mom think? What will her, her siblings think? So it's just thinking about that as well. Like, am I living a life based on what others want for my life, or what I actually want for my life?
Yes. I think one other tactical piece of advice that really helped me make the bold move in honor of myself. I think you said it on accident earlier, like living my courage in addition to living my purpose, was having balance and support in the life that I had built around me. And one of our executives actually talked about this years ago at LinkedIn, which is kind of the basis or the formula for taking a risk, right? And he actually quantified this formula in a way that really helped me. So, first, he says, do you have balance in order to take a leap? Just the way that you would, by the way, in real life. Like if you're going to do a cartwheel, do you have a cushioned area
Mm,
beneath you? You could say in a similar way, do I have my health? Do I have financial reserves in order to take a bet on a startup or my own business? Another, maybe more and less tangible example of balance would be, do I have like friends who I can lean on? Do I have a partner who will be there to give me advice? Because if you have support in those areas, I think it can be physically more possible to take a risk or bring courage to a situation in pursuit of the life you want. And then lastly is the support, right? I joked about the encouragement that our friends give us. My friend Michelle, who we both know well, Michelle Agadello, said to me that the first step of courage might be believing in yourself, but the second step is finding people who believe in you. And I think the momentum created by supportive and wise counselors is a huge, huge stepping stone on like the bridge or the road to courage, because you're not supposed to be able to do something by yourself in this society, in life. We've always been living in community. And in the same way, if you're doing something in a silo, it's much easier to get lost in the fear or the shame or what Brene talks about, right? That darkness. If we're willing to like speak our dreams and join a writing class to get your MFA instead of just writing a novel in your basement, or in my case, it's joining in with a group of women. We call ourselves a Cultivate circle. Speaking of today's topic, cultivating courage. And we share with each other our dreams or intentions for that year ahead. And we all know writing it down is like the first step to making it happen. But when you speak it out loud, you allow all those other supporters to bring their energy and their tactical support. So it's all about the encouragement to me today. And it even made me courageous enough to share a few examples / go over time on our discussion.
Well, yeah, just on the tactical side as well. I love all of that. But I think that a big shortcut for me is like I always just pay people. Like it's like I pay people to help me be courageous. So like I spend an insane amount of money on coaches. So I mean, I obviously myself am a coach, and like I do think that there is quite something that's like this is a privileged position, but I still paid a lot for coaches when I was starting my business, when my income wasn't that high, and I sacrificed everything else in order to do that because I realized that this is the most important thing to me, and that was a business coach and also a coach to work on my mindset, to talk about like any fears that were coming up with me. Her name's Brianna May. She's absolutely amazing. She's in Perth. And I knew that I needed that. So like getting coaches, getting mentors, be like going back to school for creative writing, learning how to do that. I needed to get sober. I did it through 12 steps. So it's like looking at where can you find community when people who have your desired life and your desired outcome, what are they doing? Where are they hanging out? When can you get there? But also, how can you get support if you do need that one-on-one support? Like who can you pay to help you? So I just think like with courage, like it's not how, but who. Like who can show you how to do this? And that is just such an easy, that's such an easy shortcut. And then also like, I think as well, looking at how to foster courage when something quote unquote fails. So when you think that, because what I see a lot is that when clients and even myself, when I take a risk and let's say, for example, posting on social media, having my own business, not getting, if a post doesn't perform well or not getting that engagement or being scared, just realizing that, my own power doesn't come from the validation. Like it doesn't come from out here and what other people are saying. It doesn't come from out here in terms of how many client leads I'm getting or who's signing or re-signing, etc. My power comes from within me because I've done some really fucking difficult things in my life and I've showed up for them. I've survived them. I've thrived in those environments, and just really anchoring into that rather than anchoring into external validation of like who's saying that I'm doing really well. And I found that the more I do that, the more bold I get, the more courageous I get, the more I'm willing to take action. So that's a huge thing that I'm working on right now with a few of my clients in particular, is like your courage and your validation, it comes from you. It doesn't come from external sources. And the more you do that, the stronger you get.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to take that advice as well. And honestly, cultivating courage for the next few months of bringing my podcast to life.
Yay. So where can people, I know you've got the podcast coming up. Let's do a little plug for it. Where can people find that, or what should they be doing?
So everyone who's listening is probably connected to me or should be on LinkedIn. That is where I have, host and home to my website. And I also have a new Instagram account called Take the Leap. mostly featuring jump photos, which will also often be the impetus and reminder to take a leap when you're feeling scared or considering, going for it in a particular path or choice. So I will go ahead and post in the comments for anyone listening and anyone who is listening to this later, where you can follow me on Instagram and watch this space for the podcast launch next month, 2024.
Great. I'm so excited for that.
Thank you.
And for those watching live or for watching the replay, just a little update on my business. So my one-on-one coaching practice, I will have one spot that's going to be coming available at the end of February. So spots in my practice tend to go very quickly. So if you're interested in coaching with me, get in, send me a DM. Let's talk about it. And then also very exciting, I have my course. The first time I'm doing it, it's called the Purpose Course. So it starts next month. It's for stagnant high performers who want to find their purpose. And it's a lot of what we just discovered or what we just discussed in this conversation. A lot of it's going to be rooted in courage-based practice. We'll be looking at boundaries, like you said. We'll be looking at self-compassion, looking at ways to build self-esteem, and then also be taking courageous action and align with your purpose. So I'm so excited about that. If you watch this, leave a comment. Let me know. Let Cory know what you thought. If you're watching the replay, definitely leave a comment. Thank you so much for joining us. And Cory, thank you for being so courageous. And I just love you.
I love you too. Thank you for having me in convo always.
All right. Bye.